From Sri Lanka, based in Washington, D.C., and ICC member.
Is it Asanga? Oh, hi, good to see you again. You sprouted something.
ICC member at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. You mentioned a very important point on Bangladesh and China and India working together, as well as, there are a lot of crises in the region. Sri Lanka is one of them. Economic crisis, political crisis, and Bangladesh is right now facing it. Pakistan, a few days ago, the massive protests. Now, 2 days ago, I was in Cambodia attending a conference on color revolution in many countries in the region. You are correct that many countries have chosen the path of China because China is rising. I see that very clearly in the region. How do you sort of bring these two giants, India, the largest population of the world, and China together, a synergetic relation? How do you build this? You mentioned about Bandung. Will there be a Bandung moment that two great civilization countries getting together? Thank you.
A point about following in China's path. I don't think any country can follow in China's path because only the Chinese are Chinese with their history and their Confucianist tradition. What China has shown to all the rest of us is that there's more than one path into the future. There was a time when the received wisdom was, sooner or later, inevitably, all of us will have to follow in the way of the West. And now looking ahead, the Western way is itself beset with all kinds of problems. And China appears so far to be doing quite well. So maybe all of us can find our own way into the future. And that itself provides psychological relief, that I don't have to give up my tradition, the ways of my ancestors, in order to go into the future. I can still be myself, with my own sense of self, and with my own wisdom, and learning from others, find my own way to the future. The old Nigerian president, Obasanjo, who was Lee Kuan Yew's friend, and I hosted him on behalf of Lee Kuan Yew when Lee Kuan Yew met a group of African leaders in Singapore. He's quite old now, but he's still much loved in Nigeria because he did well and he gave up power willingly. In Addis Ababa, he said, let us be very honest with ourselves that Western institutions have not worked in Africa. How can one man, one vote work when your principal affiliation is tribal? Then it becomes a game of numbers to be played by one tribe versus another tribe. So there may be a semblance of Western procedures, but it's captured. Then when the rent collection becomes too egregious, the army has to step in. And it always begins well, but it never ends well. And then another cycle of coups and restoration of democracy and coups again. We have to accept that if your principal affiliation is tribal, that strong force must be factored into the institution. And when things get out of hand, the army will have to step in, but within certain limitations. Like in Indonesia today, which is not a bad thing. I mean, look at Thailand. No Democrat in Thailand can ignore the fact of the monarchy or of the Sangha. There's a reality in Theravada society, which is also, even though you don't have a Devaraj now in Sri Lanka, it is also from the Theravada tradition. So we must all find our own way into the future. And India and China, each acknowledges that the other is an ancient people. It's almost as if they meet, they doff their hat, and they move their separate ways. India can't change China. China can't change India. And the Himalayas kept them apart from the beginning of time. There was a short border skirmish in 1962, largely forgotten in China, but which remains an open scar in India. Until today, the Indian inquiry into that war in 1962, mind you, that's 36, 62, that's over 60 years ago. The Henderson-Brooks report is still classified. Ask yourself, why does India still classify an inquiry into the origin of that war over 60 years ago? Because most Indians know that it was partly China responding to Nehru's forward policy. But the Indian press is cacophonous. And when issues are emotional, they assume a life of their own. But they got nowhere. Up there, over 5,000 meters, oxygen-deprived environment, freezing cold, precipitous geography. So they decided to pull back. And now to rebuild. It will take time. It won't be easy because there are a lot of issues. But I don't see a necessary conflict between India and China. For a time, India thought it could use the US against China. The US thought it could use India against China. But after the Ukraine war started, India became India again, which is conducting foreign policy on its own behalf. If you're in India, why not? I can sit on every table. Why should I sit only on your table? I want to sit on every table because I may like the dessert here, the main course there, the starter here, the soup there. That's India's policy. But Americans are saying, oh, in that case, I limit the cooperation, which I think is a more natural position. South Asia, of course, is still going through a difficult period because India is so dominant, and the history, unlike China and East Asia, is not as well formed in South Asia. It will take time. When the Indians accuse the Americans of causing the change in Bangladesh, I'm not sure if there's a whole truth. Because when I was in Bangladesh in February this year, I could sense the anger against the government and the anger against India. So you can't blame all the Americans. And if the Americans had hoped for an island in the Bay of Bengal to be a base for them, I think that's a non-starter. That's a non-starter. So South Asia will take longer. In ASEAN, we do not want to be caught up in the politics of South Asia. So if it's just Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, that's okay. But the moment you involve Pakistan, we say, no. We don't have the competence to handle such difficult problems. So let these be distant problems for those of us who live here. And for Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Bhutan and India, by all means get closer to ASEAN. But please leave your problems behind.